Okay. Says we are live. Round 3.
Hey.
So yeah, it's awesome to be back for this live stream storytelling. This is our 3rd week doing this, and I know I'm really enjoying it. Just the having sort of a weekly routine in some way. I know lives have been very shifted, and having this to come to you on a Wednesday is really, really nice. And to get to hang out with Chris and Danny is lovely. So we'll be doing very similar format to what we have been in the past weeks, if you've been able to join us or watch the recordings, where we'll each tell a story, and then in between we'll have a chance to gather together and have a little discussion about the story, our thoughts about it, and maybe some ideas and inspirations of how the story can continue in our lives at home, and how we might be able to draw inspiration from that as we play and learn at home. So I just wanted to say thank you again for joining us, all of you who've made time this week to come out and watch this storytelling live stream. Don't forget, there is a comments section. So if you want to interact with us, please do. We love seeing your comments and answering as much as we can in between telling stories or while the other is telling a story. So feel free to say hello there. And before we launch into it, I'll just offer Danny, Chris, do you want to say anything before we get going?
Do you want to?
I'm finding it hard to multitask. Yeah, I was just going to try and pop a comment onto the stream to see if it works or not. But yeah, hopefully that will arrive.
There it is.
Oh, that's good.
There it is. I can't add one because I don't have a device with me. So sorry. Oh, there's some.
Oh, good. Excellent.
Finally live there. I just, the story that I'm going to tell today is a story that I wrote a while ago, but I was sat in the garden this week thinking about which story I would tell, and I just noticed each day here in the north of England, the changes out in my garden have just been huge. I've got a few silver birch trees that are in pots that I had as tiny little shoots, and this week they have just gone from no buds to in full leaf, and it's been really beautiful. So yeah, I just wanted to add that. I'm grateful for those changes and the birds, and we got blue tits in one of our boxes on the shed this week as well. So it just feels like nature is really waking up for spring. So
yeah,
super grateful for that.
Yeah, it's exciting. Yeah, me too. Yeah, but very. I'm just grateful for the light and the warmth. Actually, we've had lots of cold wind, but the sun, the warmth of that sun is being amazing. So good to have that on the skin. Yeah, at last, after that long winter, it's good. Yeah,
rubbing it in, both of you. It snowed here last night.
Really?
Yeah. It's been we had a burst of spring last week, and then this week it's been chilly and windy and kind of a little bit of a return to winter. And then I woke up with a dusting of snow everywhere this morning. But it's melting. Spring is coming, just a little bit more slowly here.
Yeah.
All right. Well, shall we get going? We're gonna have Chris lead us with the first story. So shall we hand it over to you, Chris?
Yeah, sure. I'm ready to go.
Here we go.
Good luck, Chris.
Cool. Yeah, thank you. So this story is a story that I first heard from a guy called Hugh Lupton. He's a storyteller. And then several years later, I found this story, The Blind Man and the Hunter, in one of his books. And then I've since found it in 2 other books. So it's originally a West African story, and I was lucky enough as a child to live in Kenya for several years, although I wasn't there all the time. My mum lived there, and so I lived there for a year, and then when I was about 8, I left back to England, and I just went and visited her some of the holidays. So yeah, I was just lucky enough to have experienced Africa, and so this story I can sort of tell because it's got it in my bones. So maybe it's part of the accent, part of the smell, part of the forests that I've been into and wandered about in. So when I tell this story, I think of a forest quite close to the coast in Kenya, quite near Mombasa, and I've got an instrument here, which is a thumb piano. It's a metal board. It's got these wooden board, and all these little metal tongues here, which you play with your thumb. And there you go. If I play closer to the microphone. So I'll begin the story. One day, way back, in a village in Africa, twins were born. One was a girl and the other was a boy. Now, they were perfectly normal children, except for one thing. The boy, his eyes, they wouldn't see. And from the day that he learnt to stand up on his feet, well, he couldn't see a thing. But it didn't stop him from learning his way around the village. And when he was a bit older, people knew that this boy, he could see with his feet. It's quite amazing. Well, his sister used to look after him all the time, but eventually, when she came of age, a hunter from another village became more and more interested in her. And one day, after courting her for a very long time, he proposed to her. And so then there was a marriage. And then the hunter had not only a new wife, but he also had a new brother move into his house. But everything didn't go that well for the hunter because, well, he was quite an arrogant man, and he used to go out hunting a lot, and at the end of the day, he would come back with his trophy. He would give it to his wife, and then he would sit back and he may drink some beer, or he may just sing some songs, or he might just talk with his friends, and then he would eat dinner, and he wouldn't even say thank you to his wife for fixing his food. Well, the blind man, he was there, he would be helping out his sister, and most days he would ask the hunter, Mr. Hunter, please can I come with you? I am very good at hunting. Please can I come?
Oh, how can you come hunting with me? You cannot even see. Ah, what use would you be to me? No, you cannot come.
Well, the blind man, he was used to people being like this. And he kept asking day after day after day and after day, until eventually, one day, the hunter said,
Oh, okay. Well, if it will just shut you up, then you can come with me tomorrow. We will go into the forest and we will catch some birds. I will show you. Well, I don't know what I can do. I can't really show you, but I will show you how we can put up a trap. You can learn to do that. I'm sure you can learn to do that just with your hands. Okay, I will see you in the morning. Well, the next morning, they got up. And the hunter, he set off into the forest. The blind man was walking along behind him. He didn't need any help or any assistance. He was used to following people just by feeling where they were going and listening to the sounds that they were making. Well, as they went under the trees and they went through a long path with dark places and light places where the light was coming through the tall trees above, every now and then, the blind man, he would say, "Hey, psst, Mr. Hunter, can you hear that sound? Can you hear those birds up there?" Huh? What birds up there? Oh, they are making a noise.
Oh, well, said the blind man. He said, those birds, they are telling me that soon we are going to come upon a lion.
Birds cannot talk. What are you talking about? Don't be so silly.
The blind man said, but you must slow down. There is a lion up ahead. We should be careful.
You cannot tell me anything that you cannot even see.
Well, they came round a corner, and there, in the middle of the path, was a lioness. She had brought down a deer, and she was eating it.
Oh, said the hunter. He turned to look at the blind man. Oh, thank you. I am surprised. Oh, we must, well, it is not too bad, but we will walk around this one. And they left the path and they took a big detour, and they came back onto the path. So they carried on further down into the forest. And then a little way later, the blind man, he said, "Shh, listen, listen. Can you hear those birds? Psst, listen, they are telling me something." "Here you go again. You are telling me that these birds can talk." "What is it now, blind man?" "Oh, there is a snake. There is a snake. I don't know what kind, but there is a snake up ahead, over there, on the left-hand side." "I will have a look." And they went further, and then the hunter, he peered into the bushes, and there he could see, there was a big boa constrictor, a big python, going along the ground. And there were birds up in the trees. They were looking down at it, and they were scolding the snake as it slithered away. "Oh," said the blind man, "you are a very wise man. Yes, you can see with your feet, but also you seem to be able to see with your ears as well. Amazing." Well, they carried on down the path, and eventually the blind man, he said, "Stop. There are elephants by the river." "How do you know they're elephants?" "Oh, I can hear them, but more than that, I can smell them. Can you not smell them?" "No, I thought it was just some dung on the ground." "No," said the blind man, "that is the smell of the elephants. That is, they are there. They are washing because they smell too much." "Oh, okay, we will go carefully." And when they got to the river, it was true. There was a mama monkey. No, there was a mama elephant and some babies there washing in the stream. Well, they went down the stream a bit until they came to a place where they found a clearing. And then the hunter, he said, "Come with me, blind man. Let me show you how to set a trap. Here, feel this. This is a basket. We use this one for catching the birds. And if you prop it up with some little sticks like this, very carefully, and we put a little bit of food here on the inside, when the birds come and they try and peck this food, poof, the basket will fall on the birds. Can you set this?" And the blind man, he set himself the trap. It took a couple of goes, but he got there, and he could set his own trap. The hunter set another couple of traps around the clearing, and then they set off back to the village. The next morning, they set off down the path once more to go and find the traps. And the blind man, he said, "Mr. Hunter, allow me. I would like to show you that I am a good hunter. I know the way. I know the way. I don't need you to tell me or to show me how to get there." And so the blind man, he walked in front down the path. He was slower than the hunter, but slowly but surely they went past the place where the lion had been, and then they came down towards the river, and they went along a bit, and then they went in to where the clearing was. And when they got to the edge of the clearing, the hunter, he said, "Thank you. Let me go and check the traps. You just wait here." So the blind man, he stood and he listened and he waited, and the hunter went and checked the traps. And in his trap, he looked inside, and there in his trap, there was a plump brown bird. "Oh, very good. We have a bird. I will check your traps now too." And he reset the trap, and he went to the next trap, and there, inside the blind man's blind man's trap, was a beautiful bird. It was about the same size as the brown bird, but it had beautiful rainbow-colored feathers all over it that shimmered in the sun. The hunter, he wanted to keep this bird for himself, and so he said, "Oh, you've got a bird too. Hang on one moment. I will check the other traps." And he went and checked the other traps. And when he came to the blind man, he gave the blind man the brown bird, and he kept the multicolored bird to himself. "Oh, we are very lucky. We have got some food now. Let us go back to the village." And so they walked back to the village, the hunter leading, and the blind man walking just behind him. But along the way, the blind man, he didn't say anything, but he knew that the hunter had exchanged the bird for his. And so as they were walking along,
the hunter started to get a feeling inside himself. And anyway, he's worried about what he'd done. And then he said to the blind man, he said, my brother, blind man, why is it that there is so much trouble in the world? You seem to be such a wise man. But why is there so much trouble in the world? And the blind man, he said, well, my brother, it is because there are people like you in this world that take things that do not belong to them. Oh, the hunter, he realized with shame that the blind man, he knew that he had taken the bird, the blind man's bird. And so he stopped walking and he said, my brother, you are right. I did the wrong thing. I really wanted to keep this bird because the bird that I have in my hand has beautiful colored feathers. Let us swap. So they swapped the birds. I am sorry, said the hunter. And they carried on walking back to the village. When they got back near to the village, the hunter, he stopped again by this big kapok tree with its wide roots that spread out towards the ground, and it really reached up ever so high into the sky. And he said, my brother, you are very wise. How is it that there can be peace in this world then? If there is so much trouble, there must also be a way for peace. And the blind man, he said, oh, well, it is possible because there are people like you in this world, my brother, who do things to make up for what they have done wrong. They can make amends. So there's always a chance for peace in this world. Oh, thank you. You are so kind, said the hunter. And as they walked back into the village, side by side, the hunter, he called everybody from the village and he said, everybody, I would like to apologize for my behavior of treating this man as though he was inferior to me because he could not see. But I would just like to say that from today onwards, I know in my heart that this man, he is very wise, because not only can he see with his ears, he knows how to listen and speak deeply from his heart. He is a very wise man. If you need to ask anything, you can ask him, because he also knows the language of the birds. And that is the end of the story. So I'm wondering if you guys could wander around the house blindfold. Would you be able to do that, my dear audience? That's one of those things. Could you try that? That's one of the things that I've done a couple of times, is to just put a blindfold on and see if I can go and wander around the house into the bathroom, go and do my teeth. And one time I took 24 hours off to raise some money for the West of England School of the Blind by being sort of sightless for 24 hours. And that was partly inspired by hearing that story. So I know that that's a sort of a slightly silly thing that you can do around the house. It might be best to go on your hands and knees to begin with, though. Oh, so there you go. A story from Africa.
Nice. Lovely.
Thanks for that, Chris. I was thinking as well the blindfolds for listening to the birds too, because I think like bird watching is way more talked about than bird listening. And sometimes we can get distracted by looking for birds, and maybe just by removing our sight, we'll be more inclined to listen and hear things that we wouldn't notice if we were watching.
Yeah, that's a great tip.
I agree.
Definitely.
Or any of our senses as well. If you just sit for a while, you know, and we don't move around or we don't feel anything, we just sit and then we close our eyes. And I think the more senses we remove, not necessarily the more senses are revealed, but they also become finer tuned as well. We do a little thing in the woods, similar to what you described then, Chris, where you may have done this game where people work in pairs and one of them wears a blindfold and somebody guides them off through the forest, and they find a tree, and they have to feel the features of the tree and the ground and listen to it and just be with it. And then their partner walks them all the way back. They remove the blindfold, and then they have to go and try and find that tree, this time with sight. So it's a little activity that would go with that story. I love that story. I love how the hunter thought that he was inferior, and then by the end he realized what true wisdom was. It wasn't about being able to see, it was about being able to feel and understand the heart. So I love that.
Yeah, good. Thank you.
Great music too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that you made that instrument too. I wonder if is there a simple version that we can make at home?
Well, I think the most simple thing that you can do like this actually is to get a box, a tissue box or something that's that sort of size, and then you can put elastic bands all the way around the box, and then you can strum them over the hole where you get the tissues out of. That's quite a simple way to make a little sounding thing. Yeah, I haven't made anything else quite so simple at home though. Yeah, it's good. I should check it out, see what I can do.
Yeah.
Chris, can I ask you a question about the story? You mentioned then that you heard the story and then you were inspired to do the fundraiser.
Yeah.
When you found that story, were you looking for that type of story, or did you just come across it and then it inspired activities and things after you'd heard it or read it, told it?
So I'm trying to remember the sequence. So when I was starting to become a storyteller, then around the same time I was studying with a guy called Thomas Shawcon, who ran Trackways, which is a wilderness philosophy and bushcraft school, and so we did quite a lot of blindfold activity there. So whether it was bird language listening or whether it was silent movement or rubbing sticks together to make fire blindfolded. And then I went to, and he often told stories, so they often went with the activities. And around the same time, I went to a storytelling festival in Wales, and I heard Hugh Lumpton telling that story there. And the combination of those two things just made me want to try it out for 24 hours. And it was so tiring being blindfold. And I remember the terror, or almost terror of as my daughter just walked past me there, and it was when she was at school. My wife had gone out to work for the afternoon, and I needed to have a doze, so I'd got my wife to put the alarm on for 3 o'clock so that I could wake up and then go and get my daughter at 3:20. So I woke up at 3 o'clock, and where was my cane? Because I had borrowed a cane with a little ball on the end to help me sort of walk about the place, and I couldn't remember where I put it, and like, oh no, I just felt like completely lost as to where it was. How was I going to find my way down to? I just felt around, and eventually I got it. I was good. I didn't peek.
For you,
Wow.
But that was
vulnerable, I guess.
Very vulnerable.
And
I realized how organized you have to be as a person with little sight. You put things down exactly where you know they're meant to be. I still haven't learned that lesson though.
me neither.
The things we take for granted, right?
Yeah.
All right, well, Danny, are you ready to go next?
I am ready to go next.
Okay.
Yes.
I'll remove us and let you get on with it.
All right, my turn. So I'm going to tell you a story that I wrote a number of years ago, and I'm going to tell you a little bit why I wrote the story as well. And we work in the forest a lot with people of all ages, and one thing that I was witnessing was people bashing the trees with sticks. And it always hurt my heart when I saw people bashing the trees with sticks. And I would sometimes say, you know, why shouldn't we bash the trees with sticks? And people might say things like, well, the tree gives us oxygen, or the tree gives us sticks that we can use for building shelters. But for me, the reason why I thought we shouldn't bang the trees with sticks is because the tree had its own right to be there in the forest, and the tree had its own right to hold that space. So I thought, how can I communicate that idea to people? And whenever I have that thought, I normally go towards a story. So I wrote this story on the back of that thought, and of that seeing that things in the woods. So here goes. Here's the story. And like a lot of stories, this story is an old story. It's actually from a time when people thought that the earth was flat. Can you imagine that? They thought that if you walk to the edge, you could fall off and tumble into nothingness. But we all know that the earth isn't flat. We know that it's this big, beautiful, round ball with blues and greens and clouds and deserts, and it has lots and lots of different animals and flowers and plants and trees. But it hasn't always been like that. You see, in the time of this story, there was only one type of tree, or one variety of tree, and they were coniferous trees. And coniferous trees are trees that have needles, like what you might know as a Christmas tree. And these coniferous forests went on for miles and miles and miles. And occasionally you would get big meadows of wildflowers, and then miles and miles and miles of coniferous forests. And the world was different in that way, but it was different in other ways too. You see, there were no cars, and there were no shops, there were no roads, there were no parks, there were no towns. Well, there was one village, you could call it, a small scattering of mud huts that was called Jabba Jerome. Now, some of you may have heard of this place before, but some of you might not. Now, Jabba Jerome was a wonderful place to live. It was out in the middle of one of these big wildflower meadows, and it had beautiful bubbling brooks that would run through it, big boulders to climb on. And most of the people who lived in Jabba Jerome were really, really happy. Especially the children were particularly happy. They would cut mazes through the long grass, and they would collect flowers, and they would wash and play in the stream, and they would climb the boulders. But there were some people who lived in Jabba Jerome who were less happy. And sadly, they were the very, 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 very old people. The great, 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 great grandmas and granddads. And they were very, very sad because they were watching the children running and climbing and jumping, and they just wished that they could still do that, but they couldn't. You see, their elbows had begun to ache, and their knees and their backs, and their hair was falling out, and their teeth were falling out. And they just wished that they could be strong and beautiful like the children. And they would watch them and think back to their own pasts, and if they could just climb those boulders one more time. And one day, one of the very, 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 very old great, 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 great granddads was sat outside of his mud hut, and he was having a particularly tough day. He had his head in his hands, and he was wailing, "Oh, oh." He called out, "I wish I could be strong and beautiful forever and ever." And as he called, the words came out of his mouth, and they spiraled up, and they caught the wind, and the wind blew them across the meadow, and it blew them through the coniferous forest and over the hills and through the mountains until they came to a river. And then the words began to spiral up the river until they arrived at another man, sat there by the river, minding his own business. He wore a long cream cloak that went just above his feet, and his bare feet were sat in the grass. He had a big green hat with a bobble that hung over to the side, and he had a big grey beard that was tied in a plait, and around his neck he wore a silver acorn. He also carried a big wooden stick called a staff. Yes, this man was a wizard, and he heard these words, "I want to be beautiful and strong forever and ever." And he thought to himself, I know a spell that can bring eternal strength and beauty. So he gathered all of his things up into his bag. He tied them on the end of his staff, and he threw it over his shoulder, and he set off walking. And he walked for days and days and weeks over the mountains and through the forest and over the hills until he arrived at Jabberjerome. And when he got to Jabberjerome, he called all of the old people together. And he said to them, "Is it true that you want eternal strength and beauty?" And the old people said, "Yes, it is true, it is true. Give us eternal strength and beauty." He said, "Then follow me down into the field of into the wild meadow, and I will give you eternal strength and beauty." So all the old people gathered together, and he led them down through the field until he came to a big clearing. And in the clearing, he took his wooden staff, and he held his wooden staff out to the ground, and it began to shake. And as it shook, the first bit of magic appeared. He raised it up, and as he raised it, a huge wooden archway appeared. He said to the old people, "Whoever passes through that wooden archway will have eternal strength and beauty." Now all the old people looked at each other. Did they believe it? Was it a trick? Should they trust the wizard? There was a silence. And then all of a sudden, all at once, they all lunged for the archway, and they all arrived at the same time. And they got jammed stuck in the archway, and they were pushing and shoving and pushing and trying to get through. And all of a sudden, they all fell through at once and scattered around the field. And the wizard stood back, and he crossed his arms, and he watched as the magic unfurled. He watched as every single one of the old people began to stand up. And as they stood and they raised their legs and their arms, every single one of them turned into a tree. There was the cherry and the birch and the beech and the oak and the hazel and the elder and the alder. And a little robin come flying down, and it landed on the branch of the oak, and it sang a little tune of gratitude to the wizard. And the wizard said, "There you are. Your wish has been granted. You have eternal strength and eternal beauty. Every year, every spring, you will get new buds and new leaves and new flowers. And each spring you will become more and more beautiful. And as you grow taller and taller and taller, you will become stronger and stronger. And not only do you get eternal strength and beauty, you will also gain great wisdom. For in your place, you can stand and watch and listen to the world." And the wizard went on his way. And as he went, he thought it was only right to call back by Jabberjerome and tell the children what he had done. So he gathered the children together. He said, "Head down into the field, and there you will see something you have never seen before." And the children went running, and when they arrived, they saw their first ever woodland, filled with such a range of different trees. And they ran into the woodland and they began to climb on the branches and sit in the shade and look at the flowers, collect the leaves. And they loved coming to that forest. And when they come, especially on windy days, they could hear the trees talking back to them. And when they looked carefully at the trunks of the trees, they began to see their faces of their elders, sometimes an eye or a nose or a mouth. And the trees loved the children coming, and the children loved to come to the trees too. But over time, the children grew. And when they grew up into adults, they forgot about the people in the trees. They forgot about the magic woodland, and they stopped coming. And the trees became very, very lonely. And the trees called out to Mother Nature and said, "We want the children. We want to play with the children. How can we reach them?" And Mother Nature gave them seeds. And the trees asked the wind and the birds to carry those seeds far and wide. And wherever they saw children, they dropped the seeds and new trees would grow. So wherever you are in the world, wherever you play, go out and look at those trees, because the elders are within each and every tree. And take a look. You'll find eyes and nose and mouths and sometimes arms. And if you find a special tree, give it a name and give it a hug as well. And that's the end of the story.
Love it. Old, 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 old.
I was feeling myself getting old as I was saying it.
Oh, I loved that. I love that, Zanny. And it really got me thinking about how we walk past trees all the time and how I want to make more of an effort to imagine the personality of the being within that tree. And it just got me thinking about how, you know, some of us might have trees that are accessible from where we are or looking out a window, and just imagining, who is that tree and what, you know, features can you notice about it that bring a personality out of it. And even if we don't have trees, I'm also extending that to plants. I mean, I have house plants, and I'm thinking, what kind of personalities can I see in my house plants, or even in my vegetables?
Yep.
In the fridge, you know, they all are slightly different from each other. And what does that tell us about their individuality?
All of our house plants, we have a lot of house plants, and they all have names. Every single one of them. So when we go around, we're forever talking to them. And, you know, we've got a peace lily called Gandhi, and does Gandhi need some water, Gandhi? And I always funny because she'll be saying, "Dad, what are they saying back? What are they saying back?" So yeah, I think once you give them personalities, you develop a connection with them. Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. That thing that, you know, there were no trees at some stage. You know, that thing, and how, you can easily grow a tree from a seed, and isn't that just amazing that small kernel can grow into a huge old tree? But it does take, you know, the seeds to actually have fertile ground for somewhere for them to grow. And what a difference one tree can make. But a woodland is just, it's amazing. Yeah.
This year we planted conkers in glass jars, which was really, really cool because you got to see the conker shoot and the taproot come out, and then the leaves come out, and then we took them out and put them in pots in the garden. But it was a really lovely thing to do, just to see, you know, as the horse chestnut tree came out, it had two of the big leaves on the top. So even we see these huge horse chestnut trees that are just beautiful when they wake up in the spring. I love how their leaves just kind of almost like you can see their sleepy heads. But right there on the windowsill in a jar, we had a horse chestnut tree, which was really cool and really simple.
How did you get it out again afterwards?
We just tapped it. I just tapped around it, tap, and it came out, and then we put it in a pot, and it's out in the garden. That's
awesome. I'm trying to grow a pine cone right now. Actually, no, just next to me. I'm just seeing. I put it in a pot, and I'm hoping We'll see.
Yeah. Fingers
Yeah.
crossed.
Has it got a name yet?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a comment of really loving the stories and wondering if they can get a copy. Are these stories written down, or is what we're offering through a video the way that we're offering?
So I only have one story in a book, which is The Happiness Tree, which maybe I'll tell next week and link people to how they can purchase it if they like.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess we're in video at the moment, aren't we?
Yeah.
We're in video.
But the videos get posted to the YouTube channel, and you can keep referring back to them. So if you want a reminder of these stories, they'll be here for the long term,
Yep.
as long as YouTube is around.
Yep.
Great. All right.
Oh,
Are
nice
we
one.
ready for the last story?
Yeah.
Actually, a really good. I think we didn't plan this at all because we didn't even talk about our stories. But your story is a really good segue into my story because it's also about a tree and our connections with trees.
Yay.
Cool. Bring it on. I'm looking forward to listening to it.
Me
Okay.
too. Good luck.
Thank you. All right. Okay, so this is a story that I wrote last year, actually, for a group that I was working with. And it was around this time, maybe it was around this time where it was sort of transitioning into spring. We'd had a really long winter, really cold winter. And it was that, I don't know if anybody else gets this at this time of year, but I tend to get a little bit grumpy because I'm ready for spring. I love the winter, but by this point, I'm ready for some warmth. I'm ready for some sunshine. I'm ready for some flowers and plants and green things. And so sometimes emotions can feel a little bit tumultuous and rough around the edges at this time. And so I wrote this story that relates to that a little bit, and it's called Grumpkin the Elf and the Beech Tree. And it's about a little forest elf who lived amongst a big stand of white pine trees. And this elf's name was Grumpkin because he was a pretty grumpy elf. He just always seemed a bit miserable and really upset and, I don't know, angry a lot of the time. Nobody really understood why. It was just his personality. And a lot of the animals and other creatures in the forest would often avoid him just because he wasn't that pleasant to be around. Sometimes he would shout things or have outbursts, and it was hard on the other animals. And so he spent a lot of his time alone. And to be honest, he quite liked it that way, at least most of the time. And every single day, he needed to make his way from the stand of pine trees where his home was down to a stream that was nearby to collect water for him to be able to cook with and to boil the kettle and make tea. And he would take a little acorn cap, because he was a small little elf, that the acorn cap was just the right size of a bowl for him to be able to collect water for what he needed every day. And he would walk his way along a well-worn path down to the stream. And he would never really see any creatures when he would take this walk, mostly because they were hiding to avoid him. And there was one day where he took his acorn cap, put it under his arm, and started to walk down, and he was lost in thought. He was just thinking about all the things that were bothering him that day and all the things that he thought were annoying. And all of a sudden, he fell flat on his face. And he immediately got this rush of anger in his body, and he stood up and he looked around to see what had tripped him. And he could see a root across the path. And he followed the line of the root and how it connected to a beech tree. A lovely, lush, beautiful beech tree with whitish bark and bright green leaves. And he looked at the beech tree and he said, "Hey, how dare you trip me? That was all your fault. You are a terrible, terrible tree." And he marched his way down to the stream and he collected his water in his acorn cap and he marched back up the path and he gave a look at the tree in anger and went home. The following day, he needed to do his same trip down to the stream. So he took his acorn cap and he started walking down the path. And he saw the root of the beech tree, and the anger came back to him about what had happened the day before. And he looked up at the tree and he noticed that it wasn't as vibrant green as it had been the day before. It was actually looking a little bit dull. And some of the branches were drooping a little bit overhead. And as he walked, one of those branches snagged on his hat and it ripped it from his head. And again, he got this surge of anger in his body and said, "Hey, you took my hat. How dare you do that? That is all your fault. You are a terrible, terrible tree." He reached up and jumped and grabbed his hat back from the branches of the tree, and put it on his head, and he marched down to the stream, got his water, and then walked back home. Again, feeling angry and grumpy. The next day, he did the same trek, walked down along the path, noticed the root of the tree, looked up at the tree, but this time it was looking really sad and really unhealthy. The bark was starting to peel off. There were brown and black patches on it. It looked like the tree was really struggling, that something was happening to it. And as he walked past, kind of carefully ducking under it because it was drooping, some of the bark peeled off of the side of the tree and went plunk straight on his head. "Ow!" Grumpkin said. He looked at the tree and said, "How dare you drop your bark on my head? That was all your fault. You're a terrible, terrible, terrible tree." And he marched down to the stream to get his water, picked it up in his acorn cap, and then went back home, walking around the tree. And then that night, as Grumpkin was sleeping amongst the trees in the white pine, he heard a really loud crash, bang, plop. And it woke him up from his sleep. He thought, what was that? And so he got out of bed and he walked down to where the crash was, just as the sun was rising. And he saw that the beech tree was laying down on the ground next to the path. And inside, it was rotting. He could see the bark and the inside of the tree was a mush. It had gone to mush. And he was feeling a little confused because it was only a few days before that this had been a really beautiful, lush, live tree. He started to wonder what had happened. And just as he was inspecting it, looking around, a toad appeared and said, "Hello, Grumpkin. What's happened here?" And Grumpkin said, "Well, the tree's fallen over. That's what made that big crash. But I'm really glad that it's fallen over. It was a terrible, terrible tree." And the toad said, "What do you mean it was a terrible tree?" And the Grumpkin said, "Because it did awful things to me. First it tripped me, then it stole my hat, and then it threw bark at my head." And the toad looked confused and said, "That's odd. Usually trees are just standing there. They don't tend to do those things. What were you doing when you tripped?" And Grumpkin started to think about it. He thought, well, I guess I wasn't really paying attention. I wasn't looking where I was going, and I didn't see the root, and so I tripped over it. And the toad said, okay. And what was happening when it took your hat? And Grumpkin said, well, I was walking along the path, and I noticed that its branches were drooping a little bit, but I didn't see how low they were. And I guess I didn't duck, and it snagged on my hat. And the toad said, okay, and what happened when the bark hit your head? And that's when Grumpkin started to think about how the tree had really started to die really quickly, day to day. And the bark had been, as the tree was dying, it was peeling off and it fell, and he just happened to be under it. And so as Grumpkin thought about this, he realized maybe it wasn't all the tree's fault. Maybe he had something to do with what was happening with the tree too. And he started to wonder if he had treated the tree differently, what could have happened? And it was at that moment that he saw, next to where the fallen tree was, a little sapling of a new beech tree that was starting to grow. And Grumpkin looked at that little sapling, and with the realization of what he had discovered about his own grumpiness and how it had impacted the tree, he decided to make a change. And instead of being grumpy and blaming everything on others around him, that he would instead try to talk to the plant and tell it all the things that it was grateful for, or that he was grateful for. And so Grumpkin instead, every day as he would walk down to the stream and he would pass this little sapling, he would say hello to it, he would greet it, and he would tell it something that he was thankful for that day, maybe how green it was growing, or how fast it was growing, or what it was providing for oxygen, or maybe some shade on a really hot day. And he noticed each day that sapling got stronger and stronger and stronger until it had completely replaced the former beech tree that had been there before. So that's my story about Grumpkin, the elf, and the beech tree.
Hey. Nice story. I love that.
Yeah,
Nice.
those pesky trees that catch your hair and all that kind of stuff as you walk past them.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I remember you. Well, just that thing of how easy it is to blame other things for stuff that's our own fault, isn't it? And I like that story from that point of view, just to remind people that we can be a bit more responsible and, and not just seek to blame other things all the other time. That's beautiful.
Yeah, and I think just acknowledging that we all have a role in being able to improve our lives. There are some things that happen to us that are out of our control, including what's happening right now all around the world. But what are the things that we can control and or at least take responsibility for if we can't control it?
Yeah. Made me think of where I used to work in the US. We used to have this saying, which was goodwill assumed, no bad will intended. And we used to just always kind of live by that. And whenever anything happened, any conflict, we would just remind each other of that saying. Imagine if it was done with goodwill and there was no ill intention in it. And it was making me think of that with the tree. Maybe the tree tripped him because it was out of goodwill. Maybe there was something ahead that was going to upset Grumpkin and the tree was doing him a favor. Or maybe he was overheating, carrying the acorn of water, and he just had to take his hat off to save him from getting heat stroke. And if he had approached it with goodwill, then he may have seen that rather than cursing and getting angry at him. So, But I love that in the end where, he says something that he's grateful for every day for the tree as well, because it's a lovely reminder how we should do that every day and encourage that, especially in these times when there's so much bad news around, where it's easy just to forget the beautiful things that we see. So a daily gratitude is great. And if you tell it to a tree, super. Trees are non-judgmental, aren't they? So grateful for anything to a tree, I guess. So I love that.
There have been plenty of times in my life, probably I could have done it a lot more times actually, of just going out into the forest and having a good talk to the trees, or just sharing what I'm feeling angry or upset or grief about. And sometimes if there's no one for me to talk with, or I just need to be alone and go out into the forest, I tend to do that when it's a windy day, when I know that no one else is around, and I can just have a good shout and a rant. It's been so helpful, and because of that non-judgmental thing. But people say that I certainly feel like the trees are listening. They're sort of not necessarily benevolent. I'm not sure what the right word is at the moment, but responding in some way, or at least listening. I don't know. But, it's good medicine, and likewise, as well as ranting, yes, definitely having a chance to just go and say what we're grateful for.
Caylin, I loved your the troll, the way you I love that. It's great. I really got into character. Picture in my mind.
I'm not a very grumpy person. I definitely have my moments, but I tend to be, I have been described as annoyingly positive.
Do you have a whole voice that you could go with it, like when you are feeling a bit grumpy and like, I wish that people would take the tea bags out of the sink?
The voices, I really admire you two on your voices and your storytelling, because you really are able to get into character. That's something I'm practicing, but it feels awkward.
You did great.
I tried.
I was just reading the comments and somebody asked if they could use my story, and that is a definite yes to anybody who is thinking that or asking that, please do. Absolutely. The stories are there to be shared, and may them travel and bring some kind of meaning to other people too. So yeah, please do share them.
And also, just on that note, I think it's really great to ask that question too, before telling a story, because I think it is important to make sure that the story really is shared. Yeah. So thanks for asking.
Yeah. Super duper.
Could people use your story and retell your story if they would like to, Caylin?
Yeah, all the stories that I'm sharing through here, I'm very happy for people to tell and to adapt. That's something that I also like to talk about, place-based stories, and how we can be inspired by stories that we've heard someone else tell, but then adapt them to our location so that they become more relevant to us and the people that we're working with. So I'm a huge advocate of, please use these stories and adapt and change them to make them work for where you are and who you are.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, great. Well, I just feel, well, I'm not sure what the right word is, but both of you have been telling all the stories that you have written. And I'm thinking, right, I'm going to have to write a story for next week. So that's my challenge to myself, is to be inspired by you to write a story.
One of my challenges is to try to retell a really awesome story, because part of why I write them is because I'm too scared to tell other people's stories.
Yeah, okay.
It's less intimidating to me to tell my own stories. So that's something that I'm trying to overcome.
You're less I'm less likely to forget a story if I've written it. That's what I've learned about myself as a storyteller. If I read and retell stories, I have to really study them. I have to really study the stories. Where if I write it myself, it seems to stick easier. Or I guess it's not even sticking, it tends to come out easier rather than going in and then back out, I guess, from a book. So maybe next week I'll tell one. I did read a really awesome story this week to Iona that I learned for the first time that I'm definitely going to tell at some point. Maybe next week. Or maybe I'll do the happiness tree next week. I don't know.
Yeah. So we'll be here again next week. That's the plan, everyone. So we'd love for you to join us and tell your friends and your family, whoever else might enjoy taking part in this. And the recording will also be posted with the same link. So if you want to go back and rewatch it or share the link with someone else, please feel free. So that's for me. Just thank you all for being here. It's been really lovely to have this as sort of a routine each week, to be able to just gather. And I find it very calming. Like, no matter what's happening out there for this hour, it's just really nice to be here with all of you. So I'm grateful for it.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, thank you all for stopping by and listening and sharing and commenting, and just giving your hour of your day to us as well. It's really lovely.
Yeah, and I'm seeing a few comments just before we sign off about requests, a story about fire or the 4 elements. So maybe we can keep that in mind, Chris and Danny, for next week. And then also, I'm going to just put a quick shout out for whoever's still around. If you are a storyteller or know a storyteller that may want to participate in these weekly things, I'm very open to offering my slot to someone else to provide a story. So reach out if that's something that you're interested in, or nominate someone if you think they might want to participate.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool.
Okay. All right. Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Yeah, thanks for dropping in.
See you next week.
Thank you all. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.